That Christmas, I was 27 and a single mother to a 5-year-old son, Mark. We lived in a small, quiet house that my grandparents had left us in a quiet neighborhood with mostly elderly people. I had always thought it was safe, but what happened that Christmas season changed my thinking forever. Mark and I spent the afternoon shopping for toys, clothes, and gifts for my grandparents. Then we stopped at McDonald's for dinner. On our way out, we saw a Santa standing at the door. He cheerfully asked Mark what he wanted for Christmas. Mark, still holding my hand, shyly replied, "I want a Nintendo Switch." He was friendly, even joking that I was a beautiful mother. Mark smiled innocently, and I just smiled politely. But when he asked me to kiss him on the cheek, things got weird. He suddenly turned his head and tried to kiss me on the lips. I dodged it, but the shivers started. That night, after I got home, I locked the door carefully and watched a movie with Mark. But around 9 p.m., the doorbell rang. I wasn't waiting for anyone, and there wasn't anyone selling things at that time. When I asked, a man's voice outside answered, "It's Santa. You dropped something in your bag. I just want to return it." A feeling of fear overwhelmed me. I asked him to leave, but he insisted. I immediately called the mall to report it, but they said they didn't hire a Santa Claus. My heart almost stopped. When I opened the curtains, a ho-ho-ho laughter rang out in the dark. I shakily called the police. They came to check and reassure me, but I couldn't rest easy. A few days later, the doorbell rang again, this time with a letter. The next day, I found a letter taped to my door. It said something that made my skin crawl. "I don't mean to scare you, but you and your son are really cute. I found your house. Now I just need your phone number. I hope we meet again soon." The letter was signed Ted and left a phone number. I gave the letter to the police, and they promised to take care of it. A week later, they called to say the man had been given a stern warning. I never heard from him again, but the fear was still there. That Christmas, I realized that sometimes nightmares can happen even in the best of times. Always be careful with strangers, no matter how trustworthy they seem. And remember, the holiday season isn't always as peaceful as we think. I grew up in a middle-class suburban family where everyone loved Christmas. My sister and I always looked forward to the holiday, but there is one memory from my childhood that will forever haunt me: a terrifying Christmas Eve when I was only 6 years old. It was my family's first Christmas in our new home. I remember it very clearly because the events of that day are deeply imprinted in my memory. On Christmas Eve, I had trouble sleeping, partly because I was so excited, partly because I was curious about whether I would actually see Santa Claus. As usual, I stayed up late to play games on my old TV. That night, I played a Star Wars game on my beloved PS1. Around midnight, I started to need to go to the bathroom. I turned the TV volume down very low and quietly tiptoed out of the room, avoiding my mother's hearing. I knew my mother would scold me if she found out I was up late. After using the bathroom, I was about to return to my room when I heard a rustling sound coming from the living room downstairs. At first, I thought it might be Santa Claus. My childish imagination was suddenly activated, and I eagerly tiptoed down the stairs to see what Santa Claus was doing. However, when I reached the bottom of the stairs, the sight before me completely stunned me. In the dim light, I saw a strange man, not the Santa Claus I had been waiting for. He was bending over, rummaging under the Christmas tree, holding a flashlight in his hand and a black bag beside him. When he raised his head and saw me, I froze in place. He raised his finger to his lips, made a shh gesture, and said softly, "It's Santa Claus." But I wasn't fooled. I knew Santa Claus didn't look like this, and my heart started pounding. I screamed for Mom and Dad. My screams echoed throughout the house, startling the man. He grabbed the bag, but after a few seconds of hesitation, ran toward the front door. I remember vividly the sound of the door slamming shut as he disappeared into the darkness. My parents rushed down the stairs, their faces filled with worry. I cried and pointed toward the Christmas tree. The black bag was still there, filled with presents and our family's favorite Christmas tree ornaments. My dad, who hadn't had time to put on his shoes, ran out into the cold night, furious. He searched the area but couldn't find the thief. When he returned, he said the back door had been forced open and the wood around it had scratches from a crowbar. The next day, my family learned from the news that another house a few blocks away had been broken into in a similar manner. Apparently, it was the same person who had broken into ours. Even though it was many years ago, the memories of that Christmas Eve are still vivid in my mind. It was not only a lesson in vigilance, but also a haunting experience that I will never forget. In December 2020, my fiancé and I lived in a small house in a quiet residential area, a place we thought would be the perfect environment to raise a family. However, what happened 2 years ago completely turned our thinking upside down. Our neighbors were quite friendly, and we knew most of the people living around here, including Paul, who lived next door. Paul was a middle-aged man in his 40s, lived alone, and didn't socialize much with people. However, he was always polite when greeting people. But around that time, I noticed something strange. Paul hadn't left the house for a few days, and his car was still sitting in the yard. At first, I didn't think much of it, because everyone needs a break sometimes. However, one detail that caught my attention was the Christmas lights in his house. Paul had put them up early, and I thought it was interesting that a single man was so excited about it. But then, the lights started flickering erratically. That evening, when I went out to hang my own lights, I noticed that Paul's lights were not just flickering, but seemed to be faulty, glowing erratically. I thought it might be an electrical problem, but the repetition of it made me feel confused. The next day, I left for work at 10 a.m. and noticed that all of Paul's curtains were still closed. The car was still in the same place, and when I returned in the afternoon, everything was the same. The Christmas lights were still on, but no one was there. That evening, my fiancé went out and came back to tell me that Paul's lights were flickering strangely. I decided to go over and check on him and knocked on the door to ask him. When Paul opened the door, he looked tired and uncomfortable. I told him about the faulty Christmas lights, but Paul said he didn't know anything about that. As we talked, I heard a faint scream from inside the house. It was a child's scream, a scream that sent a chill down my spine. Paul had no children, and the sound clearly didn't belong here. I started to ask, but then changed my mind. I quickly said goodbye and went home, immediately telling my fiancée to call the police. I told her I thought Paul had a child in the house. The police arrived shortly after. They entered Paul's house with a search warrant, and what they found shocked me. In the basement, a young boy had been locked up for 4 days. The boy had come from a town far away and had been kidnapped. The boy was extremely clever and managed to make the Christmas lights blink by controlling the power supply from the basement, hoping that someone outside would notice and come to his rescue. Thanks to the boy's quick thinking and courage, the police were able to rescue him in time. He was reunited with his family and Paul was arrested on the spot. With a serious crime like kidnapping, Paul will certainly face a very heavy sentence. It was December, and the Christmas season was in full swing. That weekend, I was home alone because my parents were away on vacation. To ease the loneliness, I invited my girlfriend, Jenny, to come over and enjoy the holiday spirit. Jenny came over that evening, bringing along a few of our favorite Christmas movies. We decorated the Christmas tree, ordered dinner delivery, and sat down to watch a movie. We started with the emotional Polar Express, then moved on to the lighthearted and humorous Elf. In the middle of the movie, Jenny realized we were out of wine. I decided to go to a nearby convenience store to buy more. It was a familiar place, only about a 5-minute walk from home. The store was quite crowded because it was a Saturday night, and I was stuck in a conversation with a familiar employee. In the middle of the conversation, I felt my phone vibrate in my pocket. Jenny was on the other end of the line, her voice panicked. "I heard a noise, from under the floor," Jenny exclaimed. Under the floor? She meant the crawl space right below the living room. I reassured her. "It's okay. It's probably nothing. I'll be right back." Jenny asked me to stay on the line so we could talk on the way home. When I entered the house, Jenny was still huddled on the sofa, her eyes fixed on the floor. "I think there's something down there," she said, her voice low. I tried to calm her down and assumed it was probably a mouse or some other animal that had gotten in. I grabbed my flashlight and opened the crawl space door and went down to investigate. A pungent stench filled my nostrils. I shined the light around every corner, among the old boxes and dust, but couldn't see anything in particular. I was about to turn back when I heard a small noise, like something moving in the distance. Feeling uneasy, I quickly climbed up and closed the door tightly. I texted the family group saying that there might be some animal underneath and asked my dad to call an exterminator. Jenny was still worried, but I told her to let it go and continue the fun evening. That night after watching the movie, we went to bed. But around 3 a.m., I suddenly woke up because I needed to go to the bathroom. When I opened the bedroom door, the light from the nightlight shone out, and I was startled to see a figure standing at the end of the hallway. I quickly slammed the door shut and locked it. Jenny also woke up because of the noise and asked what was going on. Just then, slow footsteps sounded outside. The doorknob started to turn, and a hoarse voice rang out. "Hello? Is anyone here?" Jenny screamed, and I tried not to panic. I immediately called 911, stammering that there was a stranger in the house. The police arrived within minutes, but the person had disappeared without a trace. When they checked the crawl space, the pungent smell of urine became stronger. There was a large puddle of urine on the floor, indicating that the person had been there for a long time. What chilled me the most was the thought, when did the person sneak into the house? And if I hadn't woken up at that moment, what could have happened? After that incident, I never forgot to lock the door and check my house thoroughly, and I never wanted to go down to the crawl space again.